Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode featuring a massive Yellowjacket Wasp nest that was located underneath the backyard deck of a private residence. This nest had a huge population of female adult workers and foragers that we collected for Venom Immunotherapy. We're going to take you deep inside this busy wasp nest with a fiberoptic Borescope video camera to show you the inner structure of the nest where the brood combs are. We'll show you what the baby wasps and the brood look like in their nest cells, where they live and grow until they pupate by weaving a silk cap over their cells. We'll show you how the adult wasps tend to their larvae and do trophallaxis, or mouth-to-mouth feeding with them. It's a fascinating, hidden world inside a wasp nest that people rarely get to see close up, especially while the entire nest is still alive and fully active. During the first half hour of this episode, we'll show you compelling footage of wasps being collected for Venom Immunotherapy, or VIT, and we'll discuss interesting facts and information about how wasp venom collection works in the field and the gear that we utilize, what wasps eat and how they hunt and forage for food, and what that food looks like as they bring it back to the nest to feed their young. We'll discuss how wasps maintain their nests and why they sometimes remove their own babies from the nest and drop them outside, and what happens to wasp nests if they're not accessible and must be left inside the walls of a building. We'll go over why wasps are so important as beneficial insects to the ecosystem, and wasp intelligence and behaviors, and why you should allow wasp nests to thrive in the ecosystem and in the environment whenever possible. We'll discuss Vespula germanica, or German yellowjackets, and how they are an invasive species here in North America and in other places around the world. Following the first half hour of discussion all about wasps, we're just going to show you some unnarrated footage of wasps being collected in the field, with just the white noise sound of the vacuums we use to collect the wasps. Many people find this oddly satisfying and mentally soothing to watch and listen to. If that's you, enjoy. If not, you can skip ahead. Finally, we'll show you all the scope cam footage we captured on these 2 collection days in October of 2024. We hope you'll enjoy the close-up footage of a wasp colony going about their busy activities deep inside the nest. And we'll leave links in the description that allow you to jump to whichever parts of this episode interest you the most. As always, we thank you for being here. We thank you for the support we've had on YouTube, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Please remember to subscribe, like, share, and comment to let us know you're there. Now, let's go back to October 10th, 2024, and we'll show you the whole job. All right, it's October 10th, 2024, and we're back at an attrition collection here underneath a patio deck. Very busy nest still, bringing in lots of protein in the form of insect meat that they're hunting in the wild. So we're going to vacuum them out today, and we're going to collect them for VIT. So here we are in part 2, and this multi-part episode documents the various visits we made to this property in September and October of 2024 to handle an attrition collection at a massive yellowjacket colony that was located underneath the deck of a private residence. And the colony was so big that the wasps were really taking over the whole space around the deck, coming and going, foraging all over the place, and the property owners were getting stung. And so because of that, they called us for help. They weren't sure exactly where the nest was or what sort of damage they had done down below the deck. They just knew they were getting stung and they were tired of it. So we came in to help them out. An attrition collection involves collecting the wasps that are flying only. The ones that are flying out of the nest or flying into the nest, we interrupt their flight pattern and we collect them at the point of entry. That is how we do an attrition collection, and we simply knock down the population that way until the nest is starved out because it can't support itself if we're collecting all the foragers that are going out to get food. Attrition collections are only done when we cannot remove the nest without either damaging the building too much, or if it's just simply inconvenient for the client, or it's otherwise inaccessible to us In that case, we are unable to actually collect the entire nest, brood comb, all of the material inside the nest, and we just allow the nest to die inside the structure by starving it out as we collect all the active wasps that are actually flying out of the nest, causing the client trouble. And all of these wasps, of course, are female foragers. They're the only ones who typically leave the nest to fly and forage, and so they're perfect for venom immunotherapy collection, which is what we use them for. VIT, or venom immunotherapy, is a process in which allergy patients who have a severe venom allergy that could kill them or severely injure them, they receive a series of injections of a product that contains wasp venom. And these labs create this product and they get it out to the allergy doctors, and the doctors then allow the patients to receive these injections over a period of 3 to 5 years. And it's amazingly effective. It changes these people's lives pretty much overnight. Within just a few injections, they become almost immune, and then the immunity is really locked in after the whole series of numbers of years of injections. And it's about 98% effective, which means the 2% that is not effective is basically statistically irrelevant. The vast, vast majority of people who go through this treatment are cured for life. They are immune for life. And of course, this means they no longer have to live in fear of getting stung every single year of their lives by a single wasp or a multi-wasp attack that used to be lethal. And now it's simply not a problem for them. And that is an incredible improvement in their quality of life. And we are very proud to help take part in that process. If you know anyone who might benefit from venom immunotherapy, help them look up VIT. Let them understand how the process works and how effective it is, and let them make an informed decision. So as we view this slow motion footage, the purpose for this is to let you see and understand how much food, how much fresh meat in the form of pest insects primarily is being brought back into this nest by these hardworking forager wasps. They go out all day, every day, and they just keep going back and forth, collecting pest insects from the local ecosystem and bringing them back to feed them to their larvae. As you'll notice here, a lot of the outbound traffic just completely ignores us, and they just keep going back to their mission of bringing in food. And the ones that are coming inbound have hunted food and or collected nectar or building material for the nest, and they are bringing that back over and over and over again, steadily bringing in protein for the baby wasps to eat, or you see them bringing in chewed up wood material that they will build the nest with. It's an incredible amount of energy it takes to support this nest, and you see that in action here when we slow everything down. And you'll notice that we keep our vacuum device adjacent to the entry hole, and this is because we want to catch them as we interrupt their flight patterns. We want to catch them right out of the air as they're flying. And as you see here, they bring in food, they try to land, boom, they get caught. And this is what we do. We don't block the hole, we don't stick the vacuum tube into the hole typically, because we want them to come out. And they're only comfortable coming out if they see their open hole, and they know that they got to try to get back into that hole to deliver their food or whatever they're bringing back. So each one of them, as they carry these bits of food in, they are focused on getting back to that nest hole. They are instinctually driven to do that. Even if there's a danger, like our vacuum device, right by the hole, they're going to keep trying until we collect them. We'll either get them on the way in or the way out. If we don't catch them the first time or the second time, we'll get them on the third time or the fourth time they come back. Our collection bottles fill up regardless of how many come or go, how many get caught instantly. But as you see them coming back and forth, you'll see how they assess the situation, they attempt to get past it, and they attempt to get back into their nest. They are driven to do this. They cannot stop doing it. So we will eventually get them, simply by setting up our gear adjacent to the entry and exit holes. So during the process of venom collection, when it comes to wasps, the important thing to know is that only female wasps have a venom sac to begin with. So males don't even have venom in them. They're useless for venom immunotherapy purposes because they have no venom. Most of the wasps that are males will stay inside the nest. They don't leave the nest. They tend to stay on the nest until they finally leave at the end of the season to go mate, and then they immediately die. So what occurs here when we're doing venom collection is that we are only interested in female wasps who are flying out of the nest to forage, because generally male wasps don't fly out to forage. So it's pretty confident bet that if they're flying out, they're going to be female. So those are the ones we want to collect. So even though we're doing an attrition collection where we can't actually remove the entire nest, we still know that everything flying out of that nest is going to be useful to us for venom immunotherapy. In fact, the downside of being able to reach the nest and pull it out of the ground or pull it out of a structure like we do all the time when we do removals when they're actually accessible nests, the downside of getting the entire nest is that you also get all of the males. Sometimes, if the males have been born yet, later in the season is when they tend to be born. But then you have to really be careful not to collect too many males in your collection for VIT. You may notice that sometimes you'll see wasps exiting the nest hole with something in their mandibles. They're carrying something in their mouths and they are removing it from the nest. There's two things that may be happening there when you see this. When they come out of the nest with something in their mouths, they're either removing debris from the nest if they're digging out material so they can expand in the nest. Other times they're just removing waste material, or they may be removing some of the larvae in the nest. In other words, they're flying their own baby wasps out of the nest and they're dumping them outside. This is a natural behavior they do toward the end of the season when they can no longer support all of the larvae. They start removing some of that larva because they simply can't support them in the nest. This usually happens when the food sources in the local ecosystem begin to dry up for the season. A lot of the insects that they would usually use as prey begin to die off for the end of the year as we get toward winter, and there's just simply less food to go around. And that may seem like a suicidal thing to do for your genetic makeup, and maybe it's not going to help you push your genes into the next season. But in fact, what it does is it helps the larvae they can support survive, because there aren't too many mouths to feed, in other words. And so by reducing the number of mouths to feed, those that do remain, the larvae, can be well fed and well cared for, and they can become viable wasps that can then leave the nest and mate at the end of the season. If they're queens, they're going to mate and they're going to start their own nest in the spring after they hibernate over winter. If they're males, they're going to go out and mate with whatever queens they can find, the new queens that have been born in the nest, and they will help continue their genetic line that way. So the removal of some of their own offspring is simply a survival mechanism that helps more of them survive. And the other reason you may see them remove larvae from the nest is if the larvae have become ill or sick or not viable for some reason, or if they're parasitized. A lot of parasites attack wasps in the larval stage, and they will eat the larva from the inside of the cell, the cell of the nest. And once that happens, oftentimes the larva will not thrive, or they'll become ill with various viruses, and the other wasps will pull them out then and get rid of them because they don't want them dying or infecting the rest of the nest. In general, wasps keep their nests very clean. They're a very clean insect when they're living inside their own nest. A lot of waste will be dumped outside the nest, so if you have a large nest inside your building structure, for example, you may find a lot of smelly old waste underneath the nest, where they drop it out of the nest. But the key factor there is that they drop it outside the nest. The nest itself is typically very clean, and at the end of the season, they typically remove every single larva. So there's nothing left but empty cells in the nest. And the nest itself is actually very light at that point and relatively clean. So when we're doing attrition collections like this, where we're going to leave the nest inside the building because it's not accessible, we can assure the clients that ultimately at the end of the season, that nest will be dry and relatively free from a lot of the active living organisms that were in it throughout the season. That said, there is a significant amount of waste left over, and if you can get this stuff out of your building, obviously that's the best course of action, because you don't want anything in there if it's not part of the building structure. Obviously, mouse nest, wasp nest, bird nest, whatever it is, you want it out of your building. But in general, if you get stuck with an attrition situation and you have to have some type of wasp nest left over in your building at the end of the season, don't worry too much about it. It's not the end of the world. It's not particularly structurally an issue. It's just dried paper and wood products at the end of the day. With a old wasp nest, you can find that it might attract other insects, such as hibernating insects or mites, or spiders might live in it as a shelter, or mice might try to move into it as a shelter. These are things that are not an issue if you don't have an insect problem or a mouse problem or what have you. It's not an issue anyway. So over time, it should resolve itself by simply drying out, and the various life forms that might live in it are controlled by the fact that you're making sure the rest of your house is not infested with insects or rodents. So here we're going to go back to regular speed footage for a while, just so you can appreciate the numbers of wasps coming in and out of this nest constantly, and how many of them we're actually collecting. It's pretty incredible, the populations in these nests. Remember, in this episode, this is part 2 of a 2-part episode so far, and this was the 3rd visit we'd made to this property, about a week out from each other. So the first week we got there, we did another one, the second week, another one, the third week out, and each week we returned, there were hundreds or thousands more wasps being born and becoming foragers and leaving the nest to go forage. So these nests can repopulate incredibly fast because they're so large, and there's just thousands of eggs in the nest, thousands of larvae in the nest, and they're constantly regenerating their population after we collect them. That's why you have to keep coming back on attrition jobs to make sure the client is not bothered by these populations as they keep coming out. And if you saw part 1 of this episode, part 1 showed you that initially where the white tape is in this shot was a huge hole in the wood, and they were using that as a secondary entrance and exit. So we eventually closed that up to force them toward one entry point to make it more efficient for our collection device, and that worked pretty well. Here we move in a little closer just to show you some of the food they're bringing back to the nest. In just a moment here, you're going to see a wasp return with a large chunk of insect protein. They just pull these huge pieces of meat into this nest all day long. Such good foragers, amazing at controlling other insect populations. And this is exactly why all around the world, every species of wasp is extremely important to whatever ecosystem they're in. This is their main job in the ecosystem, is to reduce populations and control populations of other insects. For every pest insect, there is some type of wasp that hunts it and controls it all around the world. One of the wasp behaviors that's interesting to note is that you'll see in every wasp nest, especially yellow jackets like this, where they have a cavity-dwelling species and the nest is inside some cavity and there's some entry hole that allows them access. You'll see wasps sitting in the entry hole, fanning very rapidly with their wings. They're just beating their wings, and that's called fanning. The reason they do that is to help bring fresh air into the nest. They are ventilating this nest, bringing in air that's cool and getting rid of air that's warm. So they keep regulating the temperature of their nest, and they'll do this whenever the temperature gets high enough. Look at the size of this piece of meat this wasp is bringing in. It really is amazing, the volume of protein that they're bringing back to this nest every single day. And you'll see here in a minute where it's coming in for a landing, it gets sucked up by our vacuum device, thereby denying the nest that huge amount of food. This is how we do the attrition collection, and this is how we starve out the nest over time, by collecting all the foragers that are attempting to leave and gather food or bring food back to the nest. Here we see another example of a wasp removing what appears to be an immature larva from the nest. You see it right there. It's bringing that larva out, and it's going to fly it out of the nest. Right now it's trying to decide if it wants to take flight with the vacuum right there. It's turning around, deciding maybe not to. And maybe that was a wise choice, looking at what's happening to her nestmates as they come in for a landing here, getting sucked into our vacuum device. Here it makes another attempt to come out, either that or it's another one. Either way, it's either bringing out a larva or a piece of debris, but then it assesses the situation and decides to go back in again. So it's interesting to watch this type of behavior, because clearly the wasp confronts a situation, assesses it with some kind of intelligence, and bases its behavior on that new information. there is some kind of intelligence happening here with these insects. We just don't know the level of what that intelligence is, but a lot of the time it sure looks like they're really thinking. Here we see another fairly large delivery of meat protein coming in from this wasp. And even the ones that ultimately get sucked into the vacuum device, they take their time in looking at maybe what might be the best approach. Here's another one bringing in a sizable piece of meat. They're trying to figure out, how can I get to my home around this potentially dangerous threat? They're obviously thinking about it before they land. You can watch them here lining up in their flight patterns like an airport, air traffic control, just kind of lining up all the planes before they land. They're all just assessing what's happening here, watching the behavior of others, watching what this threat might be, yet they are still so driven to bring that food back that they just keep going in, and we just keep taking them one after the other. And that's how these attrition collections work. So here we're just going to show you a little montage of wasp behavior. They're bringing back lots of food, they're trying to get past our collection device, and they're getting collected as they come back. And this is the routine for attrition collections. You just simply collect them and keep denying the food over and over and over again. And ultimately, more and more foragers have to leave the nest in order to get food. And when they come out, we collect them. And finally, the nest cannot support the larva that's inside it. And that's when it starts to die. And that's how we control these nests without actually being able to reach them. As we swing the camera around here in a moment, you'll see where they're coming in from is outside in the environment. Underneath this deck, they have lots of room, and they're coming in from every side. Just constant stream of yellow jackets coming in from the environment back to this nest, and it just flows like this all day long. Really an amazing amount of insects living in this structure. When you watch them coming and going, it's pretty overwhelming. If you actually lived here and were trying to spend time on the deck just above us here, you can see why the residents here were getting stung. There's just so much activity, and it just doesn't stop all day long. And ultimately, they had to call us for assistance. Now, this client we've worked with before, they are very eco-friendly and very aware of the beneficial nature of wasps. But when you have this many wasps all over your living space, you see them all over the pool, all over the deck, they're just everywhere. And so that has to be controlled. There's no choice there. You're going to have to remove that nest for safety of the people who live here. And if you can't remove the nest completely, attrition collection is the next best option, and that's what we did here over several weeks. The best thing about working for clients who understand the importance of wasps in the ecosystem is that they typically will let their wasps survive if they're in a part of the property that's not dangerous to people. And those clients are the best. They are great at understanding the beneficial nature of having pest insects removed from your property by these wasps. It's a great thing to have a wasp nest on your property. But when they're in a space that's actually damaging the building, they're chewing away the building material to expand their nest, and there's just so many of them that people are getting stung, that's when you have to remove them. And these clients are perfectly happy to call us to get that done. But in general, these folks will leave a good, healthy wasp nest on their property on purpose when they can. And that is the way to do it. We recommend that for everybody. If you have something that's on your property that's not in a dangerous place, leave that nest alone and let it do what it does in the ecosystem. There was a great study about yellow jackets a few years back that proved that a very active yellow jacket nest in the prime of their season could remove up to 200 flies from the ecosystem per hour. That's every hour, every day, all season. It's pretty amazing how much they can do for you. And if you look at it that way, every time you see a wasp out in nature, you're a lot less likely to want to simply kill the wasp because it exists. And that's the primary purpose of this channel, is to simply let people understand the beneficial nature of most wasps and why you want them in your ecosystem when you can keep them there. And that you only remove them if you have to, and then you remove them in a green way that is not toxic to the people who live at the residence or the pets or the animals in the ecosystem nearby. It's a green removal, no toxins. And of course, the added benefit to collecting wasps alive and without chemicals is that you can use them for a positive purpose, like venom immunotherapy. In the biomedical industry, you cannot use wasps that have been contaminated by poison, of course. You can only use wasps that have been collected in a green way anyway. So that is another fantastic reason to preserve wasps, is that if you have to remove them, they can go to a good cause. They can save lives. And that is what we do in our company, Green Wasp Removal. And that is what we do with the Manchester University Wasp Survey Team. We teach them how to operate in such a way that wasps are respected, protected, and collected for the right reasons and in the right way. So you can't help but be amazed at the numbers of wasps as we watch this in real time, in actual speed. How many just keep coming. It's relentless. They are all day, every day, all season, doing the same behavior just like this. And that tells you how many of these are actually living in this structure. This nest was multi-thousands of workers, multi-thousands of eggs and larvae, and had we not interrupted it, the next generation would have been queens by the hundreds or thousands being produced for the next season. And all of those queens would have come out and attempted to hibernate over winter and start their own nests in the spring. So if you can imagine how many of these nests we may have prevented by collecting this one. And this is an invasive species here in North America. Germanica, Vespula germanica, the German yellowjacket, does not belong in this part of the world. It came from Eurasia through the shipping channels back in the late 1970s, and they just exploded their population throughout North America. And they're also doing this in Australia, where they become, and also New Zealand, where they become very problematic for the ecosystems down there, which had not had yellow jackets before. So they're reducing a ton of the insect population out there in those places at the expense of many other species that depend on the same food sources. At least here in North America, we had a whole bunch of native yellow jackets that do the same sort of behaviors in the ecosystem, maybe not as aggressively and maybe not with the same huge populations as German yellow jackets, but at least they were the same sorts of hunters. So maybe North America ecologically can survive this onslaught of German yellow jackets a little easier than some parts of the world, but that remains to be seen really over time. In general, invasive species that don't belong in a particular ecosystem are not great for the rest of that ecosystem. So we'll see. Over the next coming decades, I hope they will be studying this pretty carefully to see how our native wasps and our native insects and our mammals and birds and other things that depend on those insects are going to survive when they're up against competition like this. And this is just one nest in North America. Multiply this by the hundreds of thousands or millions, I don't even know how many German yellowjacket nests that are this voracious, this populated, and maybe not even controlled, because a lot of them can be in structures of all sorts. They can be underground. They can be anywhere that's habitable. And who knows how many massive yellowjacket nests just like this one are out there that we don't even know about. As you watch this footage, just wasp after wasp after wasp coming in and getting collected, you just have to extrapolate that out to the nth degree to try to figure out what the populations are and what they might be doing to the ecosystem as an invasive wasp. We can only hope that our ecosystem here in North America can adapt to this wasp and absorb this type of population change in the wasps that are active in our ecosystem. Now, for those of you who prefer that oddly satisfying Zen state of watching wasps being collected, here's a few minutes of that and some music to go with it. Now, for those of you who prefer just the sound of the white noise of the vacuum in slow motion and also in regular speed, here you go. The next 20 minutes of this video will just be visuals of wasps being collected as we got them, with the live sound of the vacuum, either in slow-mo or regular speed. Following that, we're going to show you some of the scope cam footage that we captured on this same day, October 10th, 2024, where we take you right inside the wasp nest by using a Borescope, which is a fiber optic cable camera that gets right inside the nest. It's pretty interesting footage. After the scope cam footage from October 10th, we're going to show you all of the collection we did the very next day on October 11th. And after you see that footage of wasps being collected on October 11th, we're going to show you the scope cam footage we got on October 11th. That was even better than the scope footage we got on the 10th because it went deeper into the nest. It showed the brood comb inside. It showed the worker wasps tending to the brood comb and the larvae in there. It's very interesting to see. If you haven't seen inside a wasp nest that's active and functional before, stay tuned for that. For now, here's 20 minutes of wasp collection with the white noise of the vacuums running. We hope it brings some peace of mind to those of you who get that Zen state rolling when you watch this stuff.
Bottle's almost full. We're gonna have to change out the bottle pretty soon.
Here we're going to show you the scope cam footage we captured on October 10th, 2024. We're going to take you right inside the nest. And what you see in the initial part of this nest is kind of like a foyer room that they have built between the actual nest brood comb and the outside exit hole that they have been using to come in and out of the nest. This little room here is the first landing pad, the first space they enter when they come into this nest. And we're just going to observe that a little bit in this section of the video from the 10th of October. After we observe them in their front room, we'll go ahead and show you a little bit of the deeper part of the nest. All the material you see here, everything that's part of the structure of the nest they built, was all constructed from wood fiber mixed with their saliva. So that material dries into kind of a Chinese lantern type paper, and that paper is what we're looking at here. It's actually quite beautiful. There's many colors in it. You can't quite make that out in this light, but when you bring it out into the sunlight, it's a gorgeous looking paper with many different colors of wood fiber mixed into it, depending on what source they were getting the wood from at the time. And really, it's a fascinating material. Wasp paper is naturally aerated, so it helps keep the temperature of the nest regulated. So essentially, the paper they construct is a thermoregulation system for the brood comb that keeps the nest brood comb, the baby wasps, then the pupae in the nest, at a very comfortable temperature throughout their development. If it gets very hot outside, this material helps aerate it, and the various layers that the wasps build will ensure that that's the case. It insulates the nest from heat. It insulates the nest from cold. It's really pretty amazing, the engineering that goes into this nest. In this clip, when we enter the nest this time, you're going to see more of a defensive response that becomes increasingly more frantic as the wasps realize that there is an intruder inside the front part of their nest. You'll notice more and more of the female guard wasps that can sting start to attack the camera, and that alarm pheromone goes out into the nest, and more of them come out to begin the attack. You'll notice their behavior becomes more aggressive. They start to lunge at the camera, they start gnashing their mandibles, simulating that they're about to attack and bite. This is all defensive behaviors that they engage in when they feel threatened. And soon here you're going to see several dozen of them start to gang up on this camera and try to push it back out of the nest. And that's what you're seeing here. They're attacking the lens on the camera, they're attacking the light, they're becoming very aggressive, and there's a lot more of them all of a sudden. This is swarming behavior when they think the nest is under threat. So anytime a wasp nest perceives a threat, they'll put out a pheromone into the air, into the nest, and that causes them to attack. And it becomes like a frenzy where they will just start to sting repeatedly, and they will bite with their mandibles and attempt to do whatever they can to scare off that intruder or that attacker, whether it's an animal or a person accidentally bumps into a nest, or here we are doing a removal, they see the camera, they're attacking the camera. Interestingly, they don't always respond this way. There are times when we enter the nest with the camera and they simply don't know what to make of it. The alarm pheromone doesn't necessarily go out, they kind of ignore it and they work around it, and they simply adapt to it. And everything calms down and they kind of go back to business as normal. But in this case, you see kind of a massive attack happening. It's quite a rumble. They're really going after that camera. So we're going to show you here a few minutes uninterrupted of what this looks like when they attack the camera. And then we're going to push the camera further and deeper into the nest and see how they respond. And we'll just show you what that looks like.
Well, we're underneath this deck again, and we're going to work on attrition collection today. As you can see, the bottle's hooked up to the vac, and we're just going to wait it out. After a couple hours, we expect almost no activity left here. Still very active today. We're going to use the scope cam again today. That's just a monitor, handheld monitor with a fiber optic camera on a cable. So what we're going to do is insert this right into the nest. And we'll let you see what the camera sees when we edit.
So here we're going to show you what the scope cam looks like when we're using it from the outside. This is the exterior of the nest. Obviously we are inserting a fiber optic cable into the access hole that allows us to take footage from inside using this scope cam. And we're just going to show you what this process looks like from our perspective at the outside of the nest. If you want to skip to what the footage looks like on the inside of the nest that the scope cam itself is seeing, you can do that by skipping forward on the timeline.
several inches into the nest space. And we're just observing inside the nest. Here you can see some of the brood comb up on top. There's cells there with the larvae in it. And these are worker wasps tending to the larvae in between the layers of comb. There's not many foragers coming back and forth anymore. So we've got most of what's flying contained today. So what's left is inside the nest mostly. It's interesting just to observe them and watch their regular behavior inside the nest. Let's go a little further in. Here you can see larvae in the cells. They move around quite a bit waiting to be fed. They're like baby birds. The more they move, the more they get fed. Traffic coming in and out at the moment. And not much traffic flying back and forth into the nest anymore. Over here, this whole area used to be a cloud of wasps yesterday and earlier today. They'd be coming in by the hundreds and thousands. Now, there's nothing. Between yesterday and today, we contained most of those foragers. And now, they're mostly inside the brood comb, tending to the larvae. Let's back out of the nest a little bit. See if we can get some of them to come out.
So after a day and a half of collecting for a couple hours a day, there's nothing flying in and out of this nest anymore, except other insects. Some native pollinators, moths, flies, native wasps. Everything we see is now inside the nest. When we use the Borescope, the scope cam can get several inches, almost 2 feet, into the space that we're taking them out of the wall. And we're seeing activity inside the nest. Between the comb layers, there's a lot of worker comb wasps working with the larvae in the nest, but they're not flying in and out. So it looks like, in general, we've got most of this issue resolved because the client will not see any flying wasps for a while. When the next round of pupating wasps are born in the nest, those adults might come out and forage, and we'll come back and collect those. But for now, as you can see, there's nothing flying in and out of here. A few honeybees, which are not native, by the way. They come from Eurasia. They never belonged in North America. They were brought here by the early European settlers in the 1600s. So when you see honeybees out like this one, these are not native pollinators. So as you can see here, there's no more inbound traffic at all, and there's just a few that are hanging around the entrance or they're inside the nest. There's not really much happening anymore as far as traffic coming and going. So once we get to this point where most of the active foragers have been collected, that's when we know it's just about time to shut down for this day of collecting. So what you see here in the collection bottle was about a couple hours worth of collecting because the nest had slowed down so much for traffic. On previous days, even the day just before this one, there was a much higher population in the collection for that amount of time. So once we get to this point in the collection where the traffic is mostly staying inside the nest, it's time to shut down for that day and come back on a different day or just wrap up the job entirely.
So, because there's nothing else flying today, we're going to go ahead and shut down.
So today was a much smaller collection, but still a couple hundred of them in there probably. Never looks like that many, but when you count them out, believe me, the dozens add up. It's probably a couple hundred. So what we're gonna do now is freeze them, putting them in dry ice. So we're gonna just make space for them in the dry ice cooler by scooping out a little bit here. All right, and then we put these ladies to sleep in the CO2. Here we're going to take you through the footage we captured on October 11th, 2024 with the scope cam. That's a Borescope that we use. That's just a fiber optic cable with a camera on the end of it, and we stick that directly into the nest entry point, and we can begin to push through the different chambers of the nest. Here you see the front room, basically the foyer they had built. This room serves as kind of a buffer zone between the entry point in the nest, the small hole in the wood that we've been using as our main collection point, and the back chambers of the nest that have the brood comb inside it. What we call this front foyer room is actually quite spacious. They have a lot of room in there. They have covered most of the wood from the construction of this home, and the deck and the foundation and the floor joists and all of that. They have covered that with paper. And as we push deeper into the nest, we reach the area where the combs of the nest are. This is where the baby wasps are kept in cells. And you're going to see those hanging upside down, which is how they're naturally positioned in nature. The open cells face the ground. The larvae, the baby wasps, hang in the cells upside down with their heads hanging down. You see some wasps here that are adult wasps that have been born and they've gone through the pupation process. They will often stick their heads back into the cells and stay cool there, and they're comfortable there, and they kind of acclimate to being adults out on the nest for a couple of days, and they'll often stay inside their cell like that for a little while before they're ready to come out and be foragers. But in the meantime, the cells are occupied primarily by larvae, which you see hanging from the ceiling here and moving around quite a bit on the upper right of the frame. That's the head of a larva hanging down, waiting to be fed. And they move around quite a bit. You'll see this one's very active in its cell, moving around, gyrating in the cell. This behavior is directly about trying to be fed. The more activity they make, the more they may draw the attention of the wasps that are bringing back food. And that's what they want. The larvae want to be fed, and so they make a lot of action and they make a lot of movements, and they'll scrape their mandibles against the side of the cell, all in an effort to try to be fed. They're like baby birds clamoring for the attention of the mother bird when the mother bird's about to feed them. You can see how the wasps are not happy to have a camera with a big bright light on it right in their brood comb area. The brood comb is where the brood is, the baby wasps. So they attack the camera fairly often, and what they're trying to do is scare off an intruder, basically. So they'll lunge at the light, and they'll try to sting the camera, and they'll gnash their mouth parts trying to look fierce. You know, they do what they can to be defensive of this area. But in general, a lot of these wasps either have just been born and they're not ready to come out of the nest yet, or they're worker wasps who are attending to the larvae, and they're not going to leave the nest anyway because they're busy trying to feed the larvae. And a lot of them are trying to engage in trophallaxis, where they just try to get a drink from the larvae, which produce kind of a sweet carbohydrate fluid that the adult wasps drink, and a mouth-to-mouth process called trophallaxis. So a lot of them are looking for something to drink in here, which helps give them energy, and then they go out to forage some more. So there's several reasons you may see wasps in here. Some of the wasps are males, and they just don't leave the nest. So they're always inside the nest, typically until they go out on mating flights. But if you look toward the top of the frames, you can see the open cells, and some of these have live larvae in them. Others have silk caps woven over them already. These were the mature larvae who have now gone into pupation in the little cocoon that they weave over the top of their cell. And in a couple of weeks, they'll come out as adult wasps. But this is all brood comb structure, and we are inside the core of the nest now, between the layers of brood comb. Here you can see a bunch of the silk caps. They're in the red circle. You can see a really clear silk cap woven over the top of a cell. This is what the larvae weave over their cell when they're ready to pupate. And pulling back here, we're just going to go back out toward the exit of the nest, and we're going to get back into that foyer, that front foyer room. So we use this Borescope tool quite often. It really does a great job of letting us see the actual construction of a nest that we could not otherwise see. And if we have no access to the nest directly, this at least allows us to know how much activity is still in the nest, how large it might be, how many pupating wasps are still yet to be born and hatch out and will be the next generation of workers. It's a great tool to have. We highly recommend it for anybody in this business. Here in the upper left of the frame, you can see larvae in the cells and some silk caps in the cells as well. So in many of the cells that we can't quite see around the edge of, there's probably plenty more larvae. It's also possible a lot of these cells are empty now because we're coming toward later fall, and that's when the nests start to wind down for population. So it's possible some of the larvae have been pulled out of these cells as well, because they'll start to eject some of the larvae from the nest when the food sources start to dry up out in the ecosystem at the end of the year. Keep your eye on the larva in the red circle. You're about to see what Trophallaxis looks like. There you saw where the adult wasp just leaned in and started licking the face and mouth of the larva, and they exchange fluids that way. That's Trophallaxis. We'll show you that clip one more time in slow motion here. You see how the wasp, the adult wasp, comes over the cell and extends its mouth parts down into the cell, right into the mouth of the larva. And they exchange fluids here in the process called Trophallaxis. And what this does is, not only does it feed the adult wasp the fluids that the larva creates, but it also allows the adult wasp to give protein that it's chewed up and malaxated and mixed with its saliva to the larva. So it's a two-way exchange of food. And scientists have studied Trophallaxis quite a bit in eusocial insects, which are any insects that have a big social colony with many members. And Trophallaxis is also a form of communication and a form of dominance behavior. Trophallaxis also helps communicate to each member of the nest what their status is in the overall hierarchy of the nest, whether you're the most dominant queen, or you're the most submissive worker, or you're just a baby larva. Whatever it is, Trophallaxis is very important in that process of letting each member of the nest understand their role and their position in the colony. And as you can see here, the larvae, they immediately move around and attempt to gain more attention from the adult wasps. So they want to do more Trophallaxis, they want to be fed more, and they want to produce more fluids for the adults, because this two-way relationship is how all of them survive. It's a win-win. The adults win by doing Trophallaxis with the larva win by engaging Trophallaxis from the adults. It's a very important part of everything that occurs in the nest. And as you can see, in between the open cells that have active larvae, there are closed-off, silk-covered, capped-off cells. And these are very mature larvae who have gone into pupation. And they'll stay in pupation for a couple of weeks. And when they come out, they'll be a fully grown adult wasp. And they'll chew the cap off of their cell, and they'll come out and begin to forage or whatever their role is on the nest. The pupae in the nest that are underneath these silk caps are what we often incubate in captivity after we remove a nest. And then once they pupate out and become adult wasps, we collect them for venom immunotherapy. So that's always a great benefit to us to be able to actually remove the entire nest, all the brood comb and everything. But when we cannot do that, we have to settle with an attrition collection where we only collect the adult wasps that are currently flying. So as far as our attrition collections go, we'll know that even though for today there's no more wasps flying outside the nest, there's no more coming back with food, we've collected everything that's flying for today, we can tell looking inside this nest that there's a whole nother brood about to be born in another couple of weeks or a week from now. And so when we come back in a week, we'll probably find hundreds or thousands more ready to go and out active and foraging, and thereby possibly bothering the client. So we'll need to come back again and take care of these. But the key factor on attritions is that each time we come back, there's fewer viable wasps in the brood, and overall the nest is dying because the support it was having from the foragers we've already collected is no longer there. They will be less and less able to feed the larvae that remain in the nest, in which case they'll start removing some of that larvae themselves because there's not enough food to go around and not enough workers to feed them and all of that. So overall, this process begins to force this nest to adapt to tighter and tighter living conditions, and ultimately the nest is killed off through that process. So if we come back a week from now, you will see a lot of these that are currently silk caps, pupae in the nest. They will be hatched out. There'll be open cells. The pupating wasp would have chewed away the silk cap, and so it hangs down or it's completely gone, and they are now out and free as an adult wasp, and they're probably taking part in foraging if they are females, unless they are new queens. And the new queens, they will go out on mating flights when they're ready, and they will mate with whatever males are born on other nests in the ecosystem, and they will end up hibernating over winter while they're impregnated, and then when they wake up in the spring, they will start their own nest and begin laying their eggs. And there may be many hundreds of queens born inside a large yellowjacket nest, so when you interrupt a nest like this on an attrition collection, you are interrupting possibly many dozens or hundreds of other nests that may form in the ecosystem, which with an invasive species is probably a good thing. So for the next 12 minutes or so of this episode until the end, you will see more footage from inside the nest here. We'll just allow you to hear what we heard as we were filming this, the sounds of the vacuum and the sounds inside the nest a little bit. You'll hear a muffled version of the live narration of the shot that you heard earlier in the video more clearly. This time it's going to be muffled and not so audible just because the microphone on this scope cam is deep inside the wasp nest, so everything that we were saying outside the nest cannot be heard very clearly, and that's okay. That's the way it is with the scope footage. So the audio you'll hear in the background of this footage is not meant to be clear and audible. It was already heard earlier in the video. We thank you for being here. Thanks for your support throughout 2024 and into 2025. We'll be happy to be bringing you quite a bit more footage from 2024 over the winter and into the spring. And of course, in 2025 summer season and beyond, we'll be showing you more footage from the new 2025 season. As always, if you enjoy the content on our channel, please do subscribe, comment, share, and like each episode that you see. This helps us continue to bring you the best possible content we can produce, and it stimulates the YouTube algorithms, of course, to push our videos and episodes out to a wider audience, and that just makes everything easier and sets us up for a better year to create more content for our viewers. Thanks again. We appreciate you riding along with us today. Have a good one. The rest of the video, for about the next 12 minutes or so, will not have any narration that's audible.
this fly-in contained today. So what's left is inside the nest mostly. Interesting just to observe them and watch their regular behavior inside the nest. Go a little further in. Here you can see larvae in the cell. They move around quite a bit waiting to be fed. They're like baby birds. The more they move, the more they get fed. Not much traffic coming in and out at the moment. And not much traffic flying back and forth into the nest anymore. Over here, this whole area used to be a cloud of wasps yesterday and earlier today. They've been coming in by the hundreds and thousands. Now, there's nothing. Between yesterday and today, we contained most of those foragers. And now, they're mostly inside the brood comb, tending to the larvae. Let's back out of the nest a little bit and see if we can get some of them to come out.